and it started out 9 years ago. But they keep adding on. That's hard to believe, east of Billings, Montana.
How much younger is he than you?
Let's see, he's probably about 10.
Are you still in good contact with all of them?
Yes.
You talk to them regularly?
Pretty regular.
You said you burnt the mortgage. What happened? You said you burnt the mortgage. What happened? How did you do that? You said you almost burnt the mortgage on your farm.
Oh, they have paid it off.
Oh. Yeah, I thought you meant that you. Never mind.
Lit on fire?
Yeah, you never know on a farm. That's what I would have been doing if I was working on a farm.
Yeah, it was a happy day. We paid it off.
Were you still living on the farm when you paid it
Yes,
off?
yes, ma'am.
How many years after that did you farm?
Oh, long time after I paid it off.
What effect did all the water conservation stuff have on farming in terms of just having to be conscious of that?
Well, that's something we always done as we went along. That's one thing about a farmer. They don't waste water or anything. They conserve it. And right now, I don't know what's going to happen to the farmers. Everybody's trying to take their water. And first thing you know, it's going to be like oil. You're going to be having to go to other countries for your groceries. And that's my biggest concern right now, is why they think they can do away without the farmers. You can't do it. That's the backbone of the country. But there's some people in Washington that they don't seem to realize they need the farmers. And honestly, I don't know what's going to become of it. It's terrible to say, but you got to have water to raise crops. And they used to come first, but they don't anymore.
Thank you, Bud. We've reached the end of the first hour. And so thank you all very much, and thank you for coming in to talk to these girls.
Thank
you.
Appreciate it. And we'll now
Well,
switch. Our first student researcher is?
Carissa Skillern.
Say it again?
Carissa Skillern.
Okay. And you're from where?
I'm from Littleton, Colorado.
Okay, very good.
South Denver.
And what's your research about?
I went into researching just some of the earlier history of Greeley, and just the understanding in a lot of ways that Greeley was kind of more predominantly just based around the cattle industry, and based around that being kind of the extent of that knowledge. And so looking a lot more into really the history of Greeley, and learning that it started out with a lot of the sugar beet industry, and that in the early 1900s that was really what it was based around, far before any of the cattle stuff came into play. And just really, really interesting in that of Greeley used to be known as one of the just top kind of beautiful cities in the country, and that it was really known for that. And just kind of interesting in that we don't really see it as such in that way now. And so really interesting to learn that, and that it was kind of known as kind of your squeaky clean city in terms of image, and in terms of kind of society type thing, and that kind of thing. And so just interesting to research a lot of the sugar industry in the early 1900s, how that kind of came about, and that brought in a lot of a lot of kind of people from Germany, Russia, Japan type thing, where Greeley was known as being kind of your little all-American white, you know.
And that's
kind of
something
that
I
kind of
didn't know.
thing.
You're about Japan. You found
Mhm.
that there were people from
Yeah,
Japan
and so
came
all
here?
of these people were coming in, kind of working in these factories, and where they were pushing kind of that 100% American image, and so these people ended up taking a real residence there, and that kind of changing a lot of the just diversity of the city and that kind of thing, and just really interesting how the sugar industry really led into the cattle industry, and the fact that they originally, I mean, it was the sugar industry kind of took over, and they were producing like 25% of the nation's sugar, and it took over potatoes as kind of the main crop of throughout the nation, and they started feeding some of that surplus and some of the beet tops to a lot of the cattle, which kind of led into them kind of messing around with controlled feeding and controlled breeding and stuff like that, where they could really control that and see how that would work, and so that kind of led into a lot of the cattle industry of that becoming something that they could just maintain and control and that kind of thing, and so kind of leading into a lot of that, which is really interesting because I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So
So the economics followed. I mean, as
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
began, that there was a reason to grow sugar because they could sell it
absolutely.
and process it
Yeah.
and made an industry out of it. And then, as you say, the cattle industry was economically possible because there was surplus feed and other things
Right.
that made all that happen.
Right, and
Yeah.
they were able to use the surplus from that to kind of lead into all the stuff with the
Right.
cattle,
Yeah,
which was really interesting.
right.
So,
Okay, thank you very much. And who's next? You are? Okay. And you are?
I'm Emily Maddox.
You
and
can
I'm
talk to me, not to the camera.
Oh, okay.
That's much better.
Okay, that's okay. I'm from Southern Colorado, in Canyon City area. So, we're kind of farm down there too. I know a lot of people who do farm, and it's not very similar though to what we talked about today. It doesn't seem like it's more ranch style, I guess. But I really found interesting is that the early agricultural history of Greeley didn't really include the cattle at all, because I was under a misconception with that, just because of what it is more today, with being like steaks and meat and slaughterhouses. So I had no idea that it ever produced sugar. I've never known that, living in Colorado my whole life. And I did also find that it produced 25% of the nation's sugar, and I think that's like a lot. It seems like a huge amount,
Absolutely.
I guess that was a big deal. I think that
And do you know when that was? When in the great days of sugar?
I think that it said that the huge boom was around the 1950s, that the agricultural-based businesses in the area really contributed to the boom of Greeley becoming a city and not like just a little town, a farm town. And that things that kept popping up in all the research I did was that the area of Greeley was really based on a few things, and that was like farming, religion, and education. And that just popped up all over because every decade they were building schools. They were always building schools around the area. I kept finding that over and over. And then UNC, which was 5 different names before it, was always educating educators. It was always for teachers, and it was always a pretty big college for this area, and it still is to this day. I think that that's interesting in that I've read on things that the community is still very church-based, and that you'll see them on almost every corner, and I think that's really cool. I think it's admirable to have a town that can stay around morals and around the things that it was kind of built under, and I guess there are a lot of farms still, which is also very good. I guess that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you went back and discovered that the Union Colony was set up, it was really promoted as a sort of temperance town, and it was all built on the idea that this was a morally righteous place to be, and that was the original draw. And then irrigation came along, and that made it really, really possible. People wanted to come here, but you had to have some way of making a living.
Right. And I had heard, like, one place I just went was a little story about this girl's first visit, and she was in 1935, her first visit to the Greeley area, and she just said that she's like, it's boring because everyone irrigates and everyone's kids irrigate, and that's all they do. And like, so she just, it was humorous to kind of like listen to someone talk about how that was kind of what it was based around,
Yeah.
and it was a big draw for people to come in.
That was very good. Thank you. Very good. Who's next?
I think I am.
Okay, very good. And your name is?
I'm Taryn Fulmer,
Okay, and from where?
and I'm from Golden, Colorado.
Golden, okay.
Yes. Basically, I researched just what oral history is, and it's just learning about the histories of our ancestors through conversations with them and learning their memories and learning about what cultures value just by kind of observing how they interact and their celebrations. And I just thought it was interesting that there's actually a title, oral history, to something that I feel like I've been doing my whole life, listening to my grandparents and their stories, and just learning about my family and our own practices. But on a more like professional level, oral history is interviewing a person or a group to get an inside perspective and like actually document a time or an important event. Let's see. It takes some research too, like you want to go into it having some background information and actually have a process when you do an interview outside of like the family situations, kind of like what we
And
did
the point I've been
today.
trying to give you over the time is that the oral history is changing in this way that throughout history.
Yeah.
Oral history was literally that. It was just one generation telling stories over and over, and then trying to transmit those through time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some good examples: the Indians and the Eskimos and people who, and some of the European cultures who carry on these stories. Religion is basically founded on that. That these whatever stories in religion were passed on through individuals, because there was the process of writing something down or retaining it was often destroyed by wars or just by deterioration of the material that it was recorded on. So now we're into the new era of oral history because now we have electronic technology to be able to preserve this.
Yeah.
And so, but as you found that oral history is not only is kind of a growing event, because with the ability to record television and record in publication, that the amount of material that's out there grows and grows, and that became the problem that exists now, is that all this information, just like we're doing here, that's why we're transcribing this, because it becomes impossible to search through so much material.
Yeah.
And that's part of what we're doing. The oral history, as a tradition, was great to carry on a cultural theme, but in terms of other people accessing the material, now it's vital that we be able to get to any particular interview or a particular subject, and the internet's made that hugely possible.
And it seems like you can keep it accurate. They won't change
Right,
what
good
that
point.
one person says is more documented than being relayed over time, over and over again. It kind of takes a different form, but now
That's a very good point. You
becomes
learn
more
from oral
permanent.
history is only, it has been shaded by the next person who carried it on.
Mhm.
So you have to take that into context, that not everything you heard is going to be verbatim for what it was, especially 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So, very good. Okay. Next. You're next. Okay. And you are?
I'm Caitlin Bratting, and I'm from Grand Junction, Colorado.
I studied how anthropologists use oral history, and anthropologists as a whole kind of are searching for an answer of what a certain culture is. And I think when you interview a person and you're right there, like we've talked about armchair anthropologists and how they hear stories and it's brought back to them, but they never actually go out in the field. But when you go out in the field, you learn so much more, and there's so much more in depth. You retain everything, and you get a more accurate account of what's going on. And you try, like, to understand what the individuals think of the rest of the world, and what the rest of the world, like how their culture shapes the individual and how the individual shapes that culture. It's kind of a never-ending circle. And I just think that it's a great way, and it's the main way that cultural anthropologists use even today to gain knowledge about other cultures or even their own culture, where they grew up. And like you are doing this project and you grew up there, and so I just think that it's the main way that they use to. Experimental knowledge is always better than, in my opinion, research or other academic knowledge. If you're there, you get more out of it, and you're more well-rounded as that experience.
In your age group, do you think many of the people you know what oral history is?
Oh, no. I didn't know what it was before I took this class. I didn't know before I started researching it that what oral history was. I like Terrence said, I had been around it my whole life. My grandparents tell me their stories every time I see them, and I just didn't know that there was a formal term for that. I didn't make any connection there. So.
But it's a very good thing, yes?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much. And you're next? Okay, all right. You have a nice loud voice, so that's good. I'll be able to pick you up from here. Okay, go ahead.
I'm Danielle Lillo, and I'm from Littleton, Colorado. And I just wanted to talk about the importance of this project. It's just allowed us to have a hands-on experience with anthropology. And while we're not really doing participant observation like we talked about in class, we are able to learn a lot about the people of Greeley by researching the history and then conducting the personal interviews to learn from the people that were there while the history was being created. In the class, we've learned that the best way to learn about the culture is from those that have always been a part of the culture, and interviews obviously are the best way to do that. It's a great way for us to learn about the people and what was taking place around them as well. And this project will just create a lasting account of the history so that it won't be lost. And like people said before, that we'll just have an accurate account of what was taking place. We've been given the opportunity to experience with the concepts learned in the classroom, which is just great that we're able to really not just understand what it is, but be able to participate in that. So by interviewing Bud here, we've just gained an understanding of farming that has taken place in Greeley and its importance, and we were able to understand the difference in lifestyles from when he grew up to the lifestyles that are taking place now.
Is there anything that stood out today as, if you could think back to what life was like in Weld County 50 years ago or more, is there anything that you wouldn't be comfortable with in that kind of lifestyle?
I have never had to work as hard as Bud has had to work.
Right.
Just manual labor ever, and I don't know that I would be able to handle it. It's just a completely different lifestyle.
Yeah. So it is.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. And
I should went first.
you've gone. Okay. So everybody's been through? Okay, I'm sorry. Very good. Bud, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, and so now we have a little time left over because we just started early. So now, any questions, any other questions for Bud? Just anything you want to talk about? All right. So you've all grown up with
I've got
electricity. Oh, yes, Ezra.
When you were real young, and during harvest time, what was the first job you were given? And how old were you?
Well, I think probably about the first job I remember of harvesting was either corn or beans, or corn. Going back when I grew up, we started out, we would have to use a long corn knife, cut your corn, hold it in your arm, you'd bundle it and shock it. And
Can you explain to everybody what a shock is? I don't know that.
well, you shock it. It looks like this when you get done. You bundle it on the corn or whatever you're shocking. Grain was the same way. They had corn binders in later years, and they also had grain binders that bound the grain in these bundles. They'd tie it with twine, and you'd pull them up, and then you'd shock them ever so many feet apart. And on the corn, and then you would go back after it dried good and all, and you'd have to break the ears off and shell them. And then you'd feed the fodder to the cattle. In later years, then they start cutting it for silage to feed the cattle. But a lot of that, it was done by hand, you know, and it was quite a job. There's one thing I might add that nobody'd want to go back to. I wouldn't want to go back to it. And that's the outside toilets. That hasn't been mentioned, but that was an experience too.
Because it's cold in the winter.
Well, you'd sort of linger in the winter waiting on somebody else to go first. Get warmed up a little. But
Slivers were a concern.
back in the latter 30s, early 40s, President Roosevelt started a job to help unemployed called the WPA. And they would come around to the farms and they would set these toilets up that was modernized. They had good vents, they had cement floors, and they had in them days they looked pretty good. They had the door, you'd open the door and the lid would go up on a rope type deal. Well, usually if you forgot to put the toilet stool down, when you left, the door would automatically do it. But it was just some of the things that you had to do. And also, back in them days, I imagine you've probably all heard about it, and it's probably kind of off the subject today, but they had what they called the CCCs. And they had these men all would go up and they'd clean up our forest and trim the trees and it give them something to do. And,
Did you pay them to do that, or?
yes, they got paid. It wasn't a great deal, but it was run by the government. And,
Because there was chronic unemployment. There were
Yes.
millions of people out of
yes, it was.
And out on the
This-
farm in those days,
This
they
was
were-
all what they called the Depression days, you know. But they created these jobs, and it gave the unemployed an incentive to do something, and it also helped them out as far as buying groceries and things. And they'd set these camps up, different areas of the mountains and even rivers. They'd even clean up some of these rivers. Some of these rivers right today are a mess. They've got logs built up around the railroad bridges that could be, someone should be out doing that now, really, and they could salvage a lot of gravel that's built up in all these rivers. A lot of that's salvageable if they'd just do it. I'm too old to do it. But you know, there is a lot of things they could create to help out on a lot of these.
Oh, and about that, I wanted to mention too, there's a historian called Douglas Brinkley, who, among other things, he wrote the Kerry book before the election. But he's now doing, if you go to the website for Fresh Air, which is the Terry Gross NPR storytelling interviews every day, there's an interview with him, and he's starting the Oral History Project for the survivors of the New Orleans flood. So he's looking into doing what he called thousands of hours of interviews, because he said, you got to get in and record this history while it's happening. So check that out, Douglas Brinkley. And who knows, I mean, there may be